These communities that are in the Montérégie are under a lot of pressure right now. They're under economic pressure, they're under climate change pressure, they're under a lot of development pressure from Montrealers who want to move out to Mont-Saint-Hilaire, live a more rural existence and commute or telecommute into the city. That means that these communities are making decisions about really important things like where to put suburban developments, what types of suburban developments to put in. They're making decisions about whether to protect forests at all, and if they're going to protect forests, where should they protect those? Should they be thinking about corridors where the forests are connected, or is that not really very important on the landscape?
On a landscape now, any landscape where there's been settlement, there are patches of woods separated by suburban development, by farmland. And what we're looking for is an ability to reconnect those woods so that plants and animals can circulate. Because when populations of animals or plants get too small, they become vulnerable to local extinction. And reconnecting them makes the whole landscape more biologically resilient.
Well, there's a history of change that involves cutting forest and making way for agriculture. We have to feed the people that live in Greater Montreal, in the region, and so the forest has made way to agriculture, and that's had a series of cascading impacts on the biodiversity that inhabits these landscapes. If we remove forest, then we lose the species that are associated with forest. So an example would be, for example, the bumblebees. We don't see them as forest species, we see them in our gardens pollinating, but actually they nest in forest and in woodlands. But they're also home to a suite of insects that are predators of pests, of insect pests.
So one of the species that's really important is ladybug. This one here is a 7-spotted ladybug. And the larvae of ladybugs eat a lot of aphids.
And so many of the pests that farmers worry about, like aphids, which feed on their soy crops, for example, can be controlled by the insect predators that inhabit forest fragments. So there's an argument that if we maintain forest patches, forest fragments in our landscape, we get this win-win scenario. We get the maintenance of these beautiful forests and these woodlands, but we also maintain the ecological services that are provided by the organisms that inhabit those forests.
We've done past studies where we've measured a dozen services provided in each MRC across the whole Montérégie. So we looked at a dozen different services. We looked at deer hunting, water quality, carbon storage, recreation, agricultural production, etc., across the whole landscape, just to know what's there now. That got us interested in how the mix of services changes across the landscape, because we could see that in some counties you would get a lot of agriculture and not much recreation. In other counties you'd get a lot of, say, corn production and a lot of recreation. So why do we get that synergy or that win-win in one area but not in the other?
What we're trying to do is develop a tool that's very accessible for people that don't have a lot of scientific education, maybe none at all. People whose concerns are in planning future development of a landscape, a mayor and his council, private developer who wants to lay out a subdivision. How do you do that on your piece of property or the properties you're responsible for in a way that's respectful of neighboring properties?
The community should know how much agricultural production will you get from this landscape? How much recreation will there be? Will there be a lot of opportunities for recreation or not very many? Will there be a lot of carbon stored in the landscape or not very much? What will the regulation of droughts or floods, which are really important in this region, what's that going to look like in a variety of different futures?
You can do that through discussion, but how do you do it with a projection into the future? That's the tool we don't have. That's the tool we need. That's the tool we're trying to develop, where people around a table, different stakeholders, could sit down with one another and basically draw on a big computer screen and say, if we do this, what's going to happen? And would come out of that tool a set of answers to that what's going to happen. How do the transport networks feed into the dispersal of plants and animals on that landscape? If we put a road here, how will that isolate this woods from that woods? There's these kinds of issues that you have to pull all that together and in a scientifically sound way project the consequence of a current decision.
Holy smokes, we're meeting. I've given talks to 50 municipal leaders about elected officials about this greenbelt. The idea is not that the research will get done, that it'll sit on a shelf somewhere in the primary literature waiting to be used. There's going to be a transition into application that we're expecting to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.